Welcome to the Startup Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Rob Hoyt. He is the founder and CEO of Tethers Unlimited. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by just giving us a little bit of background on Tethers Unlimited.
Sure. So Tethers Unlimited is a company that develops advanced technologies for space missions. And generally, we work in three areas now. We're called Tethers Unlimited because we started out working on space tether technologies for applications such as end-of-life deorbit of spacecraft and orbital maneuvering of spacecraft. And we still do a lot of work on space tethers. So that's one area. Additionally, about 15 years ago, we got into the small satellite business, and now we provide a handful of high-performance components for small satellite systems, including software-defined radios, thrusters, gimbals, and deorbit mechanisms. And then we also do research and development on new capabilities for what I call in-space services, such robotic systems for in-space assembly and servicing of spacecraft, as well as tools and systems for in-space manufacturing of spacecraft components.
Wow, that's amazing. And you came into this industry, many years ago, right? And you have a PhD in aeronautics and astronautics, correct?
Yeah, I got into this when I was in University of Washington, and I was getting my in grad school at University of Washington, and one of my favorite science fiction authors, Dr. Robert L. Forward, came to the U and gave a talk on space tethers and all the cool stuff you can do with them. And at the end of his talk, he mentioned that space tethers have a challenge, that they can get cut by space debris. And he kind of hinted that he might have some money to support a student to help him with a project. And it was good timing because this was when I was supposed to be studying for my qualifying exam. So instead of doing that, I procrastinated by messing around with my computer and coming up with some ideas, and ended up sending them off to him. And he came back a week or two later and said, "I think you've already done my project for me." Hired me as a consultant onto his project then. And then a couple of years later, as I was finishing up my PhD, we saw that there was a NASA opportunity that involved tethers, and we decided to form a partnership and go after it. And then a couple of weeks before I was graduating with no job lined up, we won a phase 1 small business contract from NASA and started the company. And I've never had to get a real job.
Well, that's the best thing of all, right?
Yep.
Well, gosh, that's amazing. And maybe you can tell us about some of the trends that you're keeping an eye on at the moment.
Well, let's see. Small satellites and lower launch costs are really dramatically changing the landscape for the space industry. When I got into the industry, satellites tended to be big, many million or $100 million endeavors. Took 5 years to put together and launch, and at that time the space industry was just kind of slowly dying. About 10 years or so ago, the small satellite revolution really started to take hold. These small, relatively low cost, quick to put together satellites have really rekindled the industry, created a whole new air opportunity for a variety of new businesses to develop and have their business cases actually close. And then the dramatically lower cost to launch and increased launch opportunities that are being afforded by primarily SpaceX, but then a whole variety of other small and medium launch vehicle providers. Again, are enabling business cases that 10 or 15 years ago just didn't make sense at all, now to close pretty well. So that's driving a lot of excitement, a lot of investment in the industry over the past year. You've seen several of the big private equity investor groups get into the space industry quite significantly, and buying up a handful of companies, including us.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing a lot of SPAC investments in space startups and other investments. So there's the industry has gone from kind of a slowly dying industry 15 years ago to a very exciting, very vibrant industry right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's completely driven by, like what you're saying, the commercialization of space. I mean, that's what's made so much of this possible.
Yep.
Absolutely. So when you look at when you look at this from an investor's perspective, I mean, there's even opportunities to invest as small investors. There's some crowdfunding platforms that allow you to do this, like WeFunder and some others. How would you, being inside the industry, how would you advise people that might be interested in investing in the space industry? How should they be looking at companies to potentially invest in when they're looking at whether it's a crowdfunding platform or they're, an accredited investor, maybe, how should they be looking at companies to kind of determine if there's really a future there?
I would say to be, very careful, check out the company. Do they actually have revenues? Is their revenue growth model at all realistic? Some of the investments that have been made over the last year have been pretty eye-popping to me. Based upon what I consider fairly outlandish projections of revenue growth.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely risk in some of those investments. However, some of the organizations, I would say kind of the private equity type roll-up plays are mainly focused on companies that have revenue, and with further investment can scale their revenue significantly. That being said, I don't have a magic 8 ball. I would say some of these some of these investments that are being made, they are dumping in hundreds of millions of dollars into these companies, and that will turn into something. Whether it's going to turn into the billions and billions of dollars that they claim is TBD. But it's going to drive a lot of change in the industry. So I would still say focus on the fundamentals. Does the company actually have a product? Do they have revenues? And are there projections of their place within the market realistic?
Yeah. I think that's really good. I guess just because it's space doesn't really make it any different than how you would look at any other investment, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, we invited you here today to give us some background on, what has been very successful for you in business. Obviously, like we mentioned earlier on, you've been in the industry for quite a long time and had a lot of great experience. So I wanted to start with just getting some background on what you would say have been the biggest keys to your success so far.
I would say the biggest one is just persistence and obstinacy. Because in the space industry, particularly when you're trying to develop really new transformational technologies, most of the time it takes quite a long time to develop that new technology, prove it out, get it demonstrated on orbit, so that the rest of the industry can trust it and adopt it into their systems.
Mm-hmm.
So technologies that Bob Ford and I started developing 25 years ago, we were 20 years ahead of the market, unfortunately. So it took a long time for the market opportunity to really come to being, and for us to push those technologies through the technology readiness, or TRL, valley of death. and get them adopted. So stuff we started working on 25 years ago is just now, kind of getting into production and becoming a real business. So you got to have some patience and persistence, and willingness to work for the long term. It's not an industry where you can do a quick, pump and dump, or real, projections of getting to $1 billion revenues in 3 years are, in my opinion, kind of laughable. It takes some persistence.
Yeah.
The other area that, my personal success, is I think my personal strengths are being able to recognize where there's a potential market opportunity, a brand new market that could be created and developed. I've been able to figure out how to take those kind of far out market opportunities and work out a stepwise plan to develop technology, get them proven, show that there's really a market, and get these products sold. And then the other aspect is, I've got a liberal arts education background at Williams College, and from that, and from high school and whatnot, I think I'm pretty good at being able to craft a story around a business opportunity and a technology, and selling stuff, particularly selling new technologies, creating new markets, really takes crafting a whole story about how this is important, why this is important to the customers, how we're going to get there, how we're going to make it real, and that that's my personal strength, is being able to craft a good story.
That's yeah. That can make all the difference in the world, and just getting people's attention, and I guess getting their imaginations going.
Yep. Yeah.
I wonder, one of the things that you said early in that answer was about getting, on orbit or in orbit experience or proof points, or, proof of concept. How do you even go about starting that process?
We have had to take kind of I'm not sure how to describe it, but like when we started developing the software defined radio products for small satellites, we had to scrape and claw our way to just getting them flown. So we got an opportunity to provide a couple of radios to a customer, and we had to do it on a shoestring, and we invested a fair amount of our own money in just getting the radios on orbit. And even though the mission wasn't, for other reasons, not our radio, other aspects of the satellite, the mission wasn't really a success. We were able to say, hey, we've got radios on orbit. They have flight heritage, and just that fact of getting, showing that we could go through the whole process of doing all the testing necessary to show that the radio is going to work on orbit, going through the process of integrating with the satellite, showing that we could do that successfully, gave us the street cred, to be able to sell it to other customers. And at that point, we start to saw the the orders and RFPs and for those products coming on. So we've continued to take that approach. Is we'll do whatever it takes to get at least an initial item on orbit as soon as we can. We're doing that right now with our robotic arm. We've been working on that for a while. We see some real market opportunities for that, but they're realistically 5-6 years out. But we want to get flight heritage for our arm, start getting test data of its operation on orbit. So we're investing our own funds to get a flight demo of that put together as soon as possible.
Wow, that's really exciting news. Did I see that NASA is picking that up for a test?
Not the robotic arm. We are currently working with NASA and Maxar to prepare a flight experiment of some of our in-space manufacturing technology. That's a project called MakerSat. That's going to be a payload that will ride on Maxar's OSAM-1 mission, and the experiment will demonstrate in-space manufacture of a 10 to 20 meter long carbon fiber composite boom. So basically what we're going to be demonstrating is that we can do in-space manufacturing of the 2x4s that we would need to build large space structures for, megawatt solar arrays, large antennas, large habitats, what large infrastructure on orbit.
That's amazing, because I mean, I'm sure that you have already, having been on board, right? You've dealt with payload, there's only so much you can put on a rocket, I guess, right?
Yep.
So only so much payload. So to be able to manufacture in space is obviously something that will be a real difference maker.
Yeah, the idea there is instead of having to design a antenna or solar array that needs to be able to fold up and to fit within a rocket and then unfold, deploy reliably on orbit, which is all very expensive and limits the size that you can create these spacecraft components with. Instead, we would carry up raw material in a compact and durable form, so we can pack a lot of it into the rocket and then use tools similar to 3D printers or extrusion systems and robotics to create these large components on orbit. So you could make them much larger than you could put up by normal means.
Sure.
So you can create systems that have much higher performance per cost, whether that's power, whether that's data throughput capabilities, whether that's sensitivity. So we can get to kind of the next generation capability in space systems with this new approach of building key components of the spacecraft on orbit.
It's so exciting, the possibilities that this will open up. When you think back, what would you say has been the most valuable business lesson that you've learned over the years?
I would say that it's been to really focus on what the customer needs, what the customer thinks they need, in creating a project or a product. Early on, as an example of that, early on, we worked on to develop a technology we called the Terminator tether for end-of-life deorbit of satellites. This was 25 years ago. And at the time, as a technologist or an engineer, it's very easy to get sucked into the coolness of your technology and try and make it as awesome as possible. And that's what we did back then. We designed a very high performance deorbit device, but it was going to be fairly complex, fairly expensive, and fairly technically risky. And we didn't sell any. We essentially failed with that product. 10 years or so later, as the market was starting to come around to realizing they would need something there, we came back to it and we took a very different approach. We were kind of guided by some of the feedback we got 20 years ago, where one of the customers we tried to sell the Terminator tether to said something like, I don't really want to put this thing on my satellite. I'm only going to do it if it costs nothing and weighs nothing. Which we weren't able to do then. But when we revisited it, we came up with a new approach, which we call the Terminator tape. And, we tried to guide ourselves by that, cost nothing, weigh nothing mantra. And we came up with a very simple, very low cost solution. And we've been able to sell that into the market. And actually recently we've been working to push the cost and mass even lower. So we think we're going to make it even more compelling in that market to help deal with the space debris issue. So, it's as an engineer, as I said, it's easy to get sucked into the coolness of your technology, but you really got to focus on what the market needs, what the customer needs.
Yeah. Without a doubt, that is, I think, even more and more relevant as things happen. I guess there was a SpaceX and OneWeb set of satellites that had a
nearly collided. Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, just a couple days ago, right? So I think as space gets more congested, right? We only have thousands of satellites up there in low Earth orbit now, and FCC, I think, has
it's
approved
looking to
tens
get,
of thousands, right?
yep, much more crowded. China, Korea, Hanwha, SpaceX, OneWeb, Amazon Kuiper, all of them are planning on putting up, AST.
Yeah.
They're talking about tens of thousands of satellites kind of each. So traffic management is going to be a huge challenge. Um, debris cleanup is going to be a huge challenge, and there's a whole legal and diplomatic set of challenges around how we would do that. So there's a lot of opportunity for innovative solutions over the next 10, 15 years to help maintain the stability and long-term viability of operations in low Earth orbit.
Yeah, absolutely. The sustainability of space is going to be really important. I think that we don't realize how much we rely on satellites in our daily lives, and and how important it is to keep that sustainability intact.
Yep.
Well, I want to just end with one last question, which is, if you could make one prediction about the future of the space industry, what would it be? I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, like I said, the lower cost and the lower cost of launch, lower cost of satellites and space systems is driving a lot of innovation, and the really biggest factor that we're starting to see over the past couple of years is that industries that previously had no relationship to space are starting to recognize the potential and relevance of space systems and space-based services to their industries. Whether that's farming, industries involving climate and climate change. You're starting to see industries outside of the traditional space customer base starting to come into the space economic sphere. Mm-hmm. And that's going to drive a whole lot of new opportunity, further change in the space industry, and further relevance of the space ecosystem to the rest of the Earth's consumer and public and government markets.
Great. I'm excited to see as that develops. We do have a question that came in from our audience, and that is, any tether spin gravity prospects?
Yeah, there are. I can't name names, but there are some folks who are looking at things like space habitats that would be, tethered together and rotating to provide some level of gravity to people and equipment on the facilities. I don't think it's going to happen in the next few years. It's probably a longer term prospect, but yes, there is work being done there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for making time for this today, Rob. It was such an informative and unique conversation. So we really appreciate your time, and would love to have you back again as some of your predictions start to take a foothold.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's fun to do. And thanks for all your viewers for tuning in.
Absolutely.